Hey everyone, Tactics here, where in this video I'll be going over some tips and tricks to help you get through some of the hardest bosses in Season 4 of Dragonflight, especially on those pesky tyrannical weeks, which of course we did start out the season on. Through talking to people both on my stream and over in my Discord channel, I've made a list of bosses here that a lot of people do seem to be struggling with, at least on week 1 of the season. But if there is another boss here that you are having issues with that I didn't cover, drop them down in the comments below and maybe we can throw together a part 2 of this video. Otherwise, let's get started with a boss that got adjusted and is now an absolute tank murderer, and that is Chargath. So the big thing here is that during the actual intermission, the kind of when the chains go out and he starts channeling, there's no AoE damage around the boss itself in melee. Instead, it's full damage into the tank, and that's pretty challenging here for a lot of players. Some other things before we actually get into the whole strategy behind that. Dragon Strike, it's not usually too big a deal. This always targets the furthest player though, so you can bait this onto like a dwarf, for example, or you can bait it onto someone that has CDs just by having them run the furthest away, and that can make your life a little bit easier. So for example, here, furthest player away, right, compared to everyone else, I'm pretty sure he's got a dwarf, so you can just get rid of it and boom, easy. So that's just the bleed. Now let's talk about the spears. So, and the main thing here is because the damage intake for tanks is so high now in this intermission fiery focus phase, you really want to be breaking these spears as fast as possible. That's the key. Break these spears quickly. And there's a few ways to do that. All of them involve instantly having one player break here. So you see there's like a gap between the spears going out and the fiery focus actually channeling. We have someone immediately jump out and they're going to instantly try and break their chain. Obviously, the boss hitbox is a little weird. Remember, you have to go like directly in the center of his hitbox to break it. And so you can do that with one, but your goal here is to have at least one break instantly. Some people are doing 2 breaks instantly. Some people are doing 1 break instantly and then follow that by having 2 people break. Either works, but you want to break 1 at least instantly, and the faster you do it, the better. Obviously, if you're ever doing 2 breaks at a time, your healer needs to be prepared, needs to be aware of that. Defensives probably need to be used, healing CDs to help get through 2 stacks of that dot. And you ideally want to break them as close to the same time as possible so you don't roll that dot as well. I think, for example, here, we might accidentally roll it. Yeah, so something else to remember. As soon as the channel starts, the boss does jump to you. And you can see I'm probably going to barely refresh this, I think. Yeah, that's not ideal. Don't do that. Don't recommend doing that. So basically, the goal is to just end this phase as quickly as possible, meaning you only need defensive coverage for, ideally at most, like 8 seconds at most. And I'm just going to break this again, not rolling this time. Boom. And basically players can make these super long like you saw there, or what you can do as well is if you wanted to do a double break, you could have these players cross their chain. So they would run here, he would run here, and then the tank would just run through the cross. Either works. If you're doing a double at the end, that's how you would want to do it, just to end it quickly. If you're doing a double at the start, obviously both players instantly jump through the boss. And otherwise, it's all about planning your defensive. So this phase happens about once every minute. That's how long it takes to happen. And so you want to make sure that you have a decent amount of coverage, and you need more than you would expect, a lot of people. So you want to make sure that you are overlapping CDs if you have them, for example. Like I think there I ran out of my Sentinel, so I had to bubble there. But the next one I'm going to have a full Sentinel running as well as Ardent probably back. And I layer those two together, Sentinel plus Ardent, and that's more than enough to get me through the whole channel if you fast forward to it. And the insta break on the one chain, the jump, and now I'm just going to walk through chains one by one. Could have been a tad bit faster here. Remember, the boss does get slowed as chains are broken. Waiting for the swirlies there, for example. Don't run too early and get into the swirlies, especially because this channel is now fully on the tank. Outranging the boss here, as you can probably see, like I'm outranging the boss, but I'm still taking damage. So you can't just kite this damage. You are still constantly going to be taking it, so don't put yourself in a bad situation and eat some swirlies. As an example there. And it's basically like if you have externals, feel free to call for them. There's still pretty decent damage happening during that phase because of the dots and stuff. So healers, if you are planning to do a double break, just be aware of it. Have a plan, just like the tanks need to have a plan to survive it. And that's generally how I recommend it. Number one though, speed on those chains. You want to break them as quickly as possible. Moving on, let's talk about the Raging Tempest, the tornado boss in Nokhud here. So the big thing is orb priorities for this boss. So of course, you want to be spread out. You can see here we're generally kind of spread around the boss, so people can be soaking. And then you want to get your orb stacked up as quickly as possible. The big thing here is though tanks are by far the lowest priority. You want your healer and your DPS to get stacks. The only reason I'm going to take this here is because obviously our dragon behind me is trying not to overlap our circles. And otherwise, if I just wait for this to go off, these are just getting thrown into nothingness. So this is the only reason I'm going to be soaking here. And I'm step backing away from them. And again, especially this first soak, You saw how much movement we used here to make sure we got as many of these orbs as possible just to get that initial stacking. Don't be afraid to do that. And now we have orbs on mostly DPS and some healers. There's going to be a few more waves. I don't think I'm probably going to get much. I assume the dragon's going to come in and swoop and take these. You see I'm not actually going hard to get these. Yeah, he's going to come in behind me there. I got one as a refresh. Speaking of a refresh, the big thing is that you can actually sustain your orb buff with this lasso. Because obviously during the electrical storm, there are not orbs spawning, but there's an orb set that spawns just before the storm. So your goal here to roll your buff is to spot one of these like far ones back, and you just wait on the very edge here until they get in, and you let it hit you instead of hitting the boss, and that will let you roll your buff into the next phase. So that's one thing. Two, you notice here we have lusted. So we've lusted to help both with healing on the electrical storm, but also lusting on pull isn't super great because no one has stacks to the damage amp. The damage amp is huge, right? It's once you stack it up, it's a lot of damage. So you really want to be lusting with some sort of damage amp. And this is also the scariest one because also your healer isn't going to be fully stacked, right? No matter how much you do on your healer, they're not going to be fully stacked. So this is a really, really good lust spot because you get some damage value and it helps you get through the healing required on this electrical storm. Outside of that, it's all about, again, coverage. These electrical storms, as you can see here, there's about a minute between them, right? It's last 15 seconds, so it's going to be about a minute before the next one starts. And you want to make sure you have a plan with defensives, potentially raid CDs, and of course healing CDs as well to make sure you can actually survive because there's a ton of damage going out here. And like I've been harping on, don't underestimate the value of putting orbs on your healer. Very, very valuable to give them a ton of extra healing, right? Because it's a damage and healing increase. And it's just very, very good. It can make it way safer if you get your healer up to 10 stacks. You can see how dangerous it is right now. Been able to ramp up now, so we're safe at the end here. But the beginning is a little bit sketchy. Well, we're low on stacks. And the healer is a little low on stacks too, right? And otherwise, though, we go back to spreading out. And you can see here, I might be able to roll here. Yeah, so I have to back out to get a soak to roll my buff here, which means you are going to take a wind burst hit. So just be aware of that, tanks, if you do want to roll your buff. It's a little bit more dangerous for tanks to specifically do it because they have to run out and eat a wind burst hit. See, I missed there too. But it's not the end of the world. Just be aware. You might need to pop a big defensive to actually roll your buff like that. But otherwise, now at this point, most people are probably getting pretty close to 10 stacks if they've rolled their buff. And so it's not a big deal here. If I get to have some stacks back up there, have to take another hit. Probably a little bit greedy, but not the end of the world. Because the more you have on this buff, the easier this fight becomes because you're doing more damage means you're going to have less of the boss overall time to deal with. And obviously also having your healer have the big healing buff makes getting through all this stuff super, well, not super easy, but much easier than if they didn't have the buff, right? So do not underestimate powering up your healer with the orbs here. Outside of that, tanks, the energy surge buff, you need to be aware if you don't have a purge in your group, because you can insta-purge this, which you see it's going to go up here. I'm pretty sure we're going to purge it. I think we have a purge in our group, maybe. But yeah, we did. So if you don't have a purge in your group, just be prepared. You're going to be taking a bit of extra damage because the boss attacks faster and deals extra nature damage for that time. So be aware. It can be a little scary, but otherwise, if you have a purge in your group, just try and purge that as quickly as you possibly can. All right, we're moving into Ruby Life Pools. So we got Kokia. This boss is pretty heavy in terms of positioning. It's a very, very big positioning boss. So to start here, we're starting on the side of the dragon we didn't kill. So we didn't kill Thunderhead in this route. We did kill Flame Gullet. So we're going to start over here towards Thunderhead, and then we're going to move clockwise around the room towards Flame Gullet because Flame Gullet is dead and not going to block our path or anything. And so that's how our movement's going to work. Now, the big thing, keep that in mind because you need to be baiting Molten Boulders as well as the ad spawns. How these work. The ad spawns only spawn on ranged players. They spawn on ranged. The boulders can spawn on anybody. So to keep that in mind, ranged, you guys always need to be watching this Blaze Binder timing because you want to put that somewhere decent. So we're going to put this, I think our goal is like put it around here. I don't know if we actually get it there, but our goal is to put this one around here and then to bait the boulder away, like towards Thunderhead or up here. Either of these is fine as long as it's not going in front of us. That's the main thing. We don't want this boulder to go this way. So this way is fine. Because you have so much space now, like you don't need to 100% min-max your space in this area. As long as it's decent, and then you just start moving this way. As long as it doesn't block you off, so you don't have to run across fire puddles. Tanks. The scary overlap is right here. So shortly after the ad spawns, you're going to have this dot on you into the Tank Buster. This Tank Buster, on each hit, applies a stacking bleed here. So you can obviously bleed cleanse that. But also, if you parry or dodge any of the individual hits, you don't get a stack. So you can by parrying or by dodging, that kind of thing, you can actually have a less scary bleed. So something to keep in mind if you have ways to amp your parry or your dodge. Otherwise, though, there is something interesting about the kicks on these Blazebound Firestorm mobs, which we can talk about in a second. First, movement again. So as one dies, remember, keep an eye on that Molten Boulder cast. You want to rotate out of this area in such a way that this boulder does not cut you off again. You can see that I'll highlight it in a second here again. We have another ritual coming out, so it's always going to be now add boulder boulder, add boulder boulder. So that's always going to work that way in terms of what you need to be baiting for outside of the first one. Actually, first one too, I think he insta spawned an add, right? So first one as well. So again, we're trying to be a little bit away here off the melee stack. Spawn the boulder. Going this way, you can see the pings. People are going that way. That spawns the boulder behind us. And we're on the firestorm. So the thing to be aware of is Inferno is obviously unavoidable damage. However, you can actually delay the second Inferno cast. Basically, it's related to the interrupt. So the interrupt, if you do the first interrupt, either quick or slow, and then you do the opposite for the other one. So you want to do one quick and one slow out of the first two kicks. If you do that, the mob will actually cast a third interruptible ability before this comes off cooldown. So you get a whole bunch of extra time to actually kill this mob before the second cast. So that's the goal. You either need to do a quick kick and then a slow kick, or a slow kick and then a quick kick. And of course, on the third cast, you want to milk that as long as possible. So you want to do a third, the kick being slow there. And you can see here, still 3 seconds on the timer. That one didn't need to be fast, but the mob was almost dead. So not a big deal there. But basically, they'll start the cast with like a couple seconds left on the CD of Inferno. And that's what you're aiming for, because that lets you get a third cast in. Because if you do two slow casts, slow interrupts rather, on those interrupts, then the mob will actually cast Inferno, the second Inferno before the third interrupt, which is something that's basically more damage, especially on a higher Tyrant key. If you're actually not killing this mob as fast as we're killing it right now, can be kind of problematic, because that second Inferno is basically what you're always trying to beat. You never want that cast to actually go off. And so you can buy yourself a few extra seconds here, because of course this, and then there's also the lockout on the mob as well. So something to keep in mind with that. Otherwise, again, you see the movement here. We were killing stuff, and then we're baiting the boulder, and then we're running out after we've baited the boulder. And we've got a new ad. We're baiting it on the range, because of course the melee can't get it. Got a boulder, so you can see how people move behind, bait the boulder, move to the ad, etc., etc. And it's just repeating this down you go. And we have infinite room here because we did kill a fire dragon. There's strategies where you kill no dragons, and you kind of have to do, you have to be way more conscious of your space in that first area. And this area, you kind of go back and forth along the room kind of deal to preserve space. But usually you'll kill a dragon, so just kite in that direction. Speaking of dragons, let's go to the last boss, Kyrakka and Erkhart. So this, again, another positioning boss, but there's also a lot of other stuff to be aware of. So to start these markers, basically there's this whole box. You think of this box here, 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 and here, right? We have only 2 markers, but imagine 2 markers in similar spots on the other side. You want to play inside that box for as long as Kyrakka is in the air. If Kyrakka is in the air, you want to be everyone inside that box, because that will bait Kyrakka down to the ground inside that box to allow you to cleave easily. If you're outside this box here or here, she will actually fly down on like the edge of the platform, and that's where she'll breathe, and that's very hard to actually cleave her in those scenarios. So always be in the box. First rule. Now, the other thing to keep in mind is, what do we do with the wind and the fire? So the wind is 100% predictable. This was figured out in season 1, so it's always, the first wind is always going to go this way towards the balcony, and then it shifts counterclockwise every time. So it's going to go up towards the balcony with this first wind in 5 seconds. It even says here on Bigwigs actually the direction, northwest. The balcony is always first, and then it's always going to go rotate clockwise. So this one's going to blow here, then it's going to blow this way to the left on my screen, then to the bottom of my screen, then to the right of my screen, and then just keep rotating like that. So because you know the wind direction and the rotation of the winds, you can place the flame spit puddles in areas where it's not going to get blown into your group, allowing you to continue to play in this relatively small box. So, for example, the first flame spit can always be dropped around that X marker. You see people already cheating towards the X marker to drop it there. Boom. They can step into the box. We have a little bit outside, because that's why the boss spawns there. Luckily, it wasn't too far, so we can still get decent cleave. But if they were a little bit further here, it would actually spawn the boss over here, which is very bad. So that's not too bad. And then the next flame spit, right, because we know that's getting blown that way, we can drop it in this corner. It's going to get blown off, etc. You can keep rotating the corners now of where you're dropping the flame spit. Next one goes there, then it goes there, then it goes there, etc. for the whole duration of this phase. Pretty easy. The goal here is to push by hitting Kyrakka below 50%. You can see, I think we're going to push here. So this is going to push no matter what, because this boss is at 52% basically. the boss is pushing after this. So I didn't hit the quite ideal thing. We ideally, whenever Kyrakka is available, you're hitting Kyrakka, and you want to push the phase by pushing Kyrakka to below 50% health. Ideally, also, if you push her below 50% health during this Roaring Flame Breath, she doesn't actually insta-phase. She will finish this entire cast sequence before she phases, so that can get you some extra damage. And then also, you see we pop Lust here as well. Actually, no, we might have Lust on pull. Yeah, ideally, you want to Lust as you're pushing this phase to get Lust in the P2. That's your goal here, so don't Lust on pull. Lust when you're pushing the phase to get extra Kyrakka damage, make it easier. You should be hard focusing Kyrakka in phase 2, because that is the dangerous part, right? That this boss now only puts 2 flame spits out instead of 3 in this phase, but basically as soon as Kyrakka is dead, you are safe. So your goal here is to kill Kyrakka as quickly as possible with Lust, CDs if you have them, and again, big defense. You can see how much damage is going out here initially. We took a bunch of damage going into the phase, and then even the 2 flame spits are super, super scary. So you want to make sure, especially on the transition, defensives, raid CDs, whatever, for that first series of flame spits, because it is very, very scary, right? It does not tickle. It does not tickle. And again, keep in mind the winds are going to continue rotating in the same pattern that they were. And so you can position your drops and your own group accordingly. Like, for example, this next flame we know is going to move into us, right? The ping goes out. And so you just need to be aware of where we are going to drop it and where current flame fire actually exists and stuff, so we can actually move accordingly when these winds come out. Now I think we're moving downwards here to get out of this path. We can go around easy. Some people went up as well. Either works. But again, very dangerous phase. And ideally, because Kyrakka was so high going into this, that's why. Otherwise, if you had pushed Kyrakka to 50% as you transition, she'd already be dead, right? She's at 13% health right now. And also, if you had Lust, she'd also already be dead. So make sure you are saving Lust for this phase, or even the transition to this phase. And make sure you're doing as much Kyrakka damage as you can initially in P1. Now, we are going to Azure Vault. Azure Vault. So Leymor, another tank murderer, another boss that's been absolutely farming tanks. And the reason for that is actually the frontal ability, the Erupting Fissure, is no longer avoidable, and it deals a pretty significant hit of magic damage. So tanks now have to make sure they have mitigation up for both this Infused Strike and the Erupting Fissure. Now, this Infused Strike is definitely significantly more dangerous because of that nasty dot it applies as well. It's a super dangerous dot, so keep that in mind, unless you're a Prot Warrior, I guess, because you can spell reflect that every single time, so do that. But otherwise, tanks are taking a lot of damage in this phase, or in this fight in general, so keep that in mind. Now, let's talk about the aiming of the frontal. So your goal when you aim the frontal is to hit at minimum 4 trees. 4 trees is what you're aiming to hit. If you hit 6, great, but your aim is 4. So what you should do here is generally hang out in the middle, and then when you see the trees spawn in the middle, because there's always 2 that spawn somewhere in this like ring here, move the boss a bit off center and then face him towards those 2. You can see here, this one actually didn't need to move off center because they spawned a little bit back, so that's fine. And now aim it towards the outside edge with the goal of hitting 1 pack, but if you hit some extras, great. That was an extra one, great. Depending on the spawn and the cluster, you'll get 4 guaranteed, and sometimes you get 6 to make your life a little bit easier. Other thing to be aware of, these saplings do a ton of damage if you stand on their swirly, even as a tank, so don't do that. Very bad. And for aggro purposes, you can see here, once you do all the breaking of the flowers, running to the middle, very, very good to help your tank just get some aggro just initially. These guys aren't going to instantly kill anyone, but it's still very, very good to get aggro. If you do ever miss any saplings, that's when you want to throw out like major defensives and raid CDs and stuff like that to survive. But usually just having a light personal for each of those stomps, you should be just fine to survive. Another example here of the trees. So I'm going to kind of see where am I going to aim this. Boom, take the hit, and I'm just going to keep it here. So I'm off center a little bit already, and it should aim behind me and hit that one there. Guarantee. That's nice. In terms of the infused strikes, I believe it's 50 seconds. Yeah, 50 seconds, 47 seconds between casts. So plan your defenses accordingly. This is another boss where you want to have something up for every single lay infused strike and the dot portion. So you need to plan in 50-second intervals essentially as a tank player to make sure you can actually survive that hit. Obviously that circle, you don't want to be in that. Spread out, same, and it's just another rinse and repeat fight from here. But it's again very punishing if you mess up your defensive coordination, for example. That's how much damage the swirly did, by the way. Not good. Do not recommend eating those. Yeah, I was a little slow. Didn't have any steed charges, just paladin life. and just barely took a hit there and almost died. So keep that in mind. Very, very dangerous. But again, people do as much as you can to make your tank lives easier here. And if you need externals, remember to rotate externals in for those infused strikes as well, if you have them available to you. Last boss here, Umbrelskul, also in Azure Vault here. This boss also received an adjustment to the shards. We'll get to that in a second. First, let's start on pull. I am tanking him towards an edge again. You don't quite go up the same way you did in Season 1 of Dragonflight, but you still can cluster the shards a little bit by being up against an edge, so it's something to keep in mind. Dragon Strike is another big tank buster. It's not as scary as Infused Strike because it's a magic dot, so you can actually dispel it here. But you do still want to have some coverage for every big initial hit it has. Same deal as the Infused Strike, but this one happens way more frequently, right? So it's every 15 seconds. So as long as you have something up, usually it is enough, but you need to make sure you have something up for each cast. And again, note, it will get interrupted. The spell queuing are at 75, 50, and 25% HP. So you don't necessarily need coverage specifically every 15 seconds. Just keep an eye on the boss health to know if you're going to interrupt a cast or not. Now, here are the crystals. The big thing to keep in mind, there's huge damage now going on. You can see it's already, people are getting pumped by this hardened crystal. It's the hardened crystal dealing all this damage. The shield deals pulsing damage while it's alive. Because these crystals are so dangerous, you want to make sure you have things like offensive CDs, defensive CDs, and healing CDs available for each of these phase pushes, slowing your phase push if you need to, right? Holding damage as needed as well, because you really want to burst this hardened crystal as quick as you possibly can, and then as soon as the shield's done, you don't care too much about it anymore, then you just can evenly cleave these crystals down. But you want to hard focus it initially to make sure that the shield breaks. Look how much damage is going out, right? Like there is a ton of damage going out, and then boom, now it's broken. Now the damage is just over, right? Completely done, and now we can finish off everything else. Not a big deal from there. Another thing you see, we did actually lust that as well. So using things like Bloodlust now instead of on pull, but on a crystal set to help you kill them and also stay alive during them. Very, very good. This Unleashed Destruction is the only other real party damage going on in this fight, and you usually don't need a defensive for that, at least on current key levels. So use defensives when crystals spawn kind of preemptively to help mitigate that damage, and any other group CDs you can have as well. Very, very good. You see here, you can see how grouped this is, right? Like if we were in the middle of the room here, it wouldn't be nearly as grouped as this, but because we're on the edge, they can kind of spawn together a little bit here, which is nice. So again, big damage on the hardened crystal. And that's the main priority on this fight. The other thing to be aware of is the positioning of these arcane orbs. So they have a bigger patrol radius now than they did at the end of Season 1. They got changed a couple times, but at the end of Season 1, they had a relatively small patrol radius, and so you would just move every cast. Now with how big their patrol radius is, usually wait for about 2 casts, and then you can do a big movement. I actually think I did this wrong. I think I would still move along this way, along the wall, because I still have one more set of shards to get cast here. But you can move straight across the room like this just to get out of dodge if you're really in danger. But I think I would move this way a little bit more, just because you have a ton of open area over here still, right? Because I pulled to an edge. So this works just as well as moving here, and it has the benefit of clustering these shards a little bit better when these shards spawn here, right? I don't know how good this cluster is going to be. It's not great, right? It's not terrible, but it's not great, and would be a little bit better if it was along an edge. So something to keep in mind with the movement. I still recommend pulling along the wall, but not the end of the world. And the big thing again, save damage, save healing, save defensives for the shards. They're very scary now, when before they weren't really scary at all, right? So something to keep in mind there. But there we have it, guys. Hopefully this helps you out with you slamming your keys, and if it does, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more content like it, including advanced route walkthroughs that highlight some interesting tech and strategies, all coming very soon for every single Season 4 dungeon. Otherwise, big shout out to my Patreon supporters for all of their help, and I'll see everyone in the next video.